I'm doing well.
Okay.
The video you sent me, I've actually already watched because that's the one that Ahmed sent me. I was I was really impressed that you got an interview with Professor Noam Chomsky. That's so cool.
I feel proud of it, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it's great actually to talk to you, Scott. I am very thrilled to have this conversation, lovely conversation with you together. Since we are both teachers and we both work in the field of language teaching. So this is pretty much the first question that I'll ask you. This is going to be an interview and I'm going to be biased towards English, not Arabic, but please feel free to ask me questions about Arabic in case this is something of an interest to you.
It's a stable connection, so I don't know if that's on my end or on your end.
Do you see that your internet?
Now it seems good.
Okay, because if it shows on your side, that means it's on your side that the internet connection is unstable. Can you get to?
It's possible. It's possible that it's because my wife, she's from Italy, and she is also talking with her cousin in Italy right now, and my kids are watching TV, using the internet, so maybe too much.
I barely can hear what you're saying. Can you disconnect and get it closer to the router just in case if that is
the router is like 5 feet away from me. The router's in the basement, which is where I am. So
okay.
I think it's just that because my wife is using video call and my kids are watching TV through the internet, that probably it's slowed down a little bit.
Okay. Well, okay. Yeah, I still see that the voice and the sound is a little bit jittery, but we can just maintain a little bit of stable connection in case we proceed with that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Scott. How did you start your career as an English instructor, and how did you end up teaching in the school now, and what's the passion behind teaching at a school?
Okay. Well, I actually studied originally advertising, but by the end of college, I realized I was not interested in it. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after I graduated, and an opportunity came up to study abroad to learn Russian in Kazakhstan. And I went there after college for what was originally going to be a year. While I was there, I met a lot of students who wanted to learn English. And so I started, having some informal clubs with some university students that wanted to learn English, and they were helping me a little bit with my Russian. And then while I was there, I actually met my wife and ended up staying in Kazakhstan for an extra year because she was studying there as well. And after I came back to the US, I still wasn't a teacher. I didn't have a degree to be a teacher, but my wife worked in universities, so I was always around many people from other countries who wanted to improve their English. So I continued to, have these little conversation clubs with university students who were learning English. And I decided that I wanted to turn that into my full-time career. And I went back to school while working full-time and got my master's in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages like you have. And I am now in my third year of being a full-time high school ESL teacher. I teach students from all over the world, but because I'm in the United States, the majority of my students are Spanish speakers. My Spanish is okay. I studied Spanish in high school and college, but I kind of let it lapse for a while. But I also have a number of students from Arabic-speaking countries like Palestine, Yemen, Egypt, and there are a couple students from Iraq, but their English is good enough that I don't normally work with them directly. But some of them just recently arrived and they spoke no English at all. So I began trying to learn some Arabic just to kind of connect with them and also help give them some direction whenever I would ask them to do something and they would just stare at me with this deer in the headlights look on their face. That's why I recently started trying to learn some Arabic, but it is much more difficult than any language I've tried to study before.
Actually, that's because you haven't studied it either on the right materials or with the right instructor, or maybe there are a few things that might be considerably important for you to decide that it's a difficult language. It's a difficult language in terms of the perception of it as a difficult language, but there are, as we say, I mean, well, as I tell my students most of the time, that language is like a house. You can enter the house from the front door or the back door or from the kitchen or from the one of the windows, or you can just break in and get in one of the windows there. I mean, so it's pretty much like that. But the only difference between breaking in this house and breaking in language is that there is no legal consequences for the latter. Now, TESOL, since this is pretty much the common ground for me and you, this is pretty much going to be a juicy conversation. How did you get to know Ahmed, first of all?
So he was a student at the University of Missouri, where I did my my undergrad degree.
Oh my God! Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and so we connected through one of those like conversation clubs. His English was already very good, but like I was involved with some other student organizations that he came to events with, and so we connected through that. And we hadn't talked in a long time, but then I recently reached out because I said I don't have any Arabic speaking friends in the area where I live now because I recently moved, and so I was reaching out. Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you live right now in particular?
So I live in Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States, but I live near the border, and I actually teach in Delaware. So
okay, perfect.
Delaware, as
beautiful
you,
city.
May or may not know, is where the current president of the United States was a senator for a long time. So
yeah, President Biden.
Yeah, President Biden.
Okay, so I was in the United States with Ahmed when he was studying at Missouri. But I was in California. I was in Middlebury Institute of International Studies doing my TESOL at that time, 2000, towards the end of 2010 to 2013. So I pretty much stayed for 3 years and then graduated and came back. And then he migrated abroad. TESOL.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your TESOL and how you were able to apply part of what you theoretically had during the TESOL program into your teaching right now. And if you can just walk us through some of the methods that you use with EFL students in particular.
Yeah, so what I will say is that my experience before becoming a high school teacher had been primarily learning with adults, like whether those were adults in college or adults who are older than that. And so I felt like there was a big shift for me, at least when I moved from teaching adults who primarily opted into learning English versus these high schoolers who were like thrown into the deep end. Like some of my students like are refugees. Some of my students are very recent immigrants and maybe had to become immigrants because of reasons that were not planned. And so many of my students are not necessarily learning English willingly. And so that was a big shift for me, is seeing like how to apply some of the principles I learned to not so willing students. So like whenever I was studying TESOL, I know that a big part of the field was motivation, but I never really paid much attention to that research because all my students were fairly motivated to learn. Like, in fact, they would often want to have extra time with me. And now my students just can't wait to like get out to play soccer with their friends after school or play video games or things like that. So, but I think like the one thing that is different from what I was expecting based on my experience is that a lot of at least where I am, the teaching is really geared towards English with a specific focus on academic application. Whereas a lot of the English teaching that I studied was focusing much more on like practical, like life skills. Like, you know, many of the examples and some of the research were talking about like when you're out in the community, when you go to the store, when you do these sorts of things. Whereas a lot of the English that my students need are the ability to understand when their chemistry teacher talks to them about something, or when their history teacher. So I had to do a shift with like a lot more academic English even earlier than I think that some of them are prepared, just because the way that ESL works in at least Delaware, but I think most of the United States, is that students don't get like a period where they adjust to being in the country where they just study English. They just are thrown right into their classes. And so a lot of my my instruction has been trying to just help them like not sink.
So can we say it's part of what you're dealing with is something like a shock and awe, but in terms of language for students. I have a curious question, but hopefully you have free time to have a sequence of meetings like this, and then we will just funnel it down to talk about Arabic and Arabic structure and syntactic structure of Arabic, if you are interested. But since you are a TESOL, probably that's in your DNA right now. And I'm pretty sure you are impaled with this amount of questions like this one in particular. And that is, what is the major struggle that you have with people coming from MENA, Middle East and North Africa? What skills in particular and why?
Okay, I think that it depends. Like I do have two students who are from Palestine that their level was a little bit higher, but in my experience with some of my other students, most of them had very little English instruction at all. So like it was, when they arrived, they were not able to ask to go to the bathroom in English even. So that's a big struggle. That all of the four skills were very low for them.
Okay.
So, whereas with some of other students who I have that are from other regions that are a lot more cognates, it was much more easier for them to quickly adapt to some of like basic instructions, like, you know, click here, get out your book, things like that.
When you talk about cognates, you mean countries who are coming from like Morocco or Lebanon, where they speak?
Sorry, I meant that the majority of my population are Spanish speakers, and so when those students arrived, like they were able to more quickly adapt to some basic commands, basic instructions.
Yes.
Whereas my experience with some of the students who were true beginners in English from Arabic-speaking countries, like they didn't have those hooks that they could quickly grasp onto, and so I had to help them, especially with like listening. Was a big thing at the very beginning, because they were getting all this input from their teachers, many of whom, like, they should know better, but they don't adapt their speaking speed to non-native speakers. A lot of times, many of them use idioms frequently. Like I constantly have to remind them, like, these are not transparent like things. The students are not going to understand what you mean. Especially when you use sports metaphors based on sports that don't exist in their countries. Like, like I think listening was definitely one of the skills right at the very beginning that many of my students from the Middle East really needed to focus on, because they needed to get instruction from their teachers and be able to respond to that.
In this particular skill, how do you approach teaching it to this group of students?
So, I can talk about how I do and how I wish I could do.
No, let's talk about how you do, because this is,
sure.
I mean, so, there's a huge chasm between theory and practice. And in recent years, I've been noticing that TESOL has shifted from practice to theory. So they test something and they check if it's proven to be true and valid, reliable, measurable, quantifiable, to be considered as a good, tangible way of teaching students and ensuring their learnability. So they're shifting the equilibrium from practice to theory. So based on what they are practically doing in the classroom, they're flipping it into a theory, which ultimately ends up having, even with little number of students, there should be some sort of tangible evidence that this is not theory. It's not ink on paper. What we are saying is proven to be true because this is what we've been doing in the classroom, and we could see some tangible evidence of their output or their ability to engage, to speak, and to be part of the bigger community.
Sure. So what I typically do, because many schools in the United States, like we have classes that are honestly too large for the population. So the class that I have for beginners has almost 30 students in it, and it makes it very difficult to do the sort of like small group instruction that I think would be really ideal for especially true beginners like many of my Middle Eastern students. But due to the pandemic, my students have gotten a little bit more used to using technology. And so I have tried to leverage that to give them opportunities to practice listening, where they use the computer, they can listen to audio and replay it. Usually I will introduce some key vocabulary that they are going to need to use in their classrooms. Vocabulary that might be used in one of their history classes, for example. And then I either find or create short audios. Usually the clips might be anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute and a half that includes those vocabulary words in it. And I allow them to listen to them a few times and then answer basic comprehension questions about those. And then I try to do my best to follow up with the students based on those. But it's often difficult whenever there's so many students that are I have to deal with. I also try to use have partners speak to each other to practice listening to their partners. But as I mentioned earlier with motivation, it can quickly devolve into the students trying to speak to one another in their own language, or because many of them are new, they're still going through the silent period. And so that can be a difficult process as well. Those are
how do you overcome this speaking practice that they have and they develop between each other when it comes to the fact that all of the input that they're getting is in English? Do you interrupt their communication with each other once that happen? Or do you just let it go, and by the course of time, they will understand that this is not for their own good if they keep practicing or they speaking in their own mother tongue?
So I often do, but not always. Like I know that one thing I know is that many of my students spend most of their days, especially the Middle Eastern students, because in my school there are about 1,000 students, and about 120 of them are the more recent term, at least in the United States, that's been in vogue is multilingual learners. And about, I'd say like 12 of them are Arabic speakers. So most of them spend most of their days in classrooms where there's no one else who speaks Arabic. So they're sitting silently most of the time. And so I want them to have a little bit of opportunity to speak in Arabic just so that to get that social connection. But I often, if it goes on for more than a minute or two, I often interrupt and say, remember, our focus is to improve your English, because I know most of them are not planning, their families are not planning to move back to their home country. So I remind them, hey, you're going to be here for probably a long time. And you can ask your parents, it's much harder to learn a language when you have, a full-time job and you have kids and you have responsibilities. So that I feel like with the not to make too broad of strokes, but I feel like the Arabic students often seem to be more open to that correction than some of my Spanish speaking students. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing or what, but I found that they're often very much like, oh, you're right, Mr. Parsons, like let's we need to focus on this. But
I think
it can be hard because they are 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons. And the other reason is that, I mean, the age gap is contributing to some extent, but probably the majority of attribution is to the grammar-based language training that they get in their home countries before they depart, or when they do their studies at MA or bachelor degree. The Arabic culture is based on grammar translation method, and it's been this for decades. Recent years, there's been this shift. We can consider as a dramatic shift of language teaching to teach based on communication and student-centered training and scaffolding their skills to a point where they can collaboratively work on team projects and present something in front of audience and practice public speaking. But these are based on the private or the government institution, and whether this institution has the qualifiable people to run this kind of training, because the kind of issue, the majority of issues that we have currently in Iraq, as an example, is that we have a huge number of students in the classroom, a shocking big number. Maybe.
So when I said 30 earlier, you were like, "Oh, that's a small class."
That's, well, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Do
you hear me?
Yeah, I was talking with a friend of mine. He is a physics teacher, and he said, I have 60 students in my classroom and I teach them for 40 minutes per day.
Wow, that 60 is unreal. Like,
how do you deal with this kind of situation?
I mean, what I often try to do in my class, so in my school, and the schools in the United States are totally varied on this. So even other schools in the school district that I'm in have different models, but our school uses a block system where we have 8 classes, and every day they have 4 of them, and the next day they have the other 4, and the classes are 90 minutes long. So we have a long time. And so I know that my students are going to be really overwhelmed and bored. So I try to.
So the class that you're delivering is runs for an hour and 30 minutes, right?
Right. Every other day.
That's a good amount of time for the teacher to deliver the lesson plan. But I was just making fun of how 40 minutes is just a ridiculous amount of time, that it's not enough for one single student to learn the language. So I calculated the point of contact between the teacher and students from the primary school to the graduation with a bachelor degree. And I told them, I mean, it's hypothesis building on the fact that if there are 40 students in the classroom and they are taking a class for 40 minutes once a day, 5 times a week, 20 times a month, multiplied by 12 months, multiplied by the total amount of period of their contact with English up until they're graduating. And then I told them that you need 180 years to be a good English speaker.
Right.
And I was just making fun of the fact that this is not real, by the way, because I mean, but the point that I wanted to mention here is that the 40 minutes is not enough, and it's not it's not useful for students to learn anything, not only grammar or English in general, but it's not useful to learn anything.
Right.
So,
because at the beginning of class, you have to get the students going, and then you have to kind of like resolve the class at the end. And then that's like 30 minutes of class left. And if there are any problems, it just makes it difficult.
So that brings the next question, which is very important. And that is going to be, of course, built on your experience with language teaching. What is the best way, according to your experience, of learning English based on your observation, of course, and experiential knowledge?
I think that, like, it's obviously, I think it's different for students in the United States than in Iraq, because students in the United States are swimming in English all the time.
Of course.
But I
like
think
that analogy.
is for students to, it's for them to find like practicable ways to use the English that they're learning in real life situations. And so, like, you know, many of my students, like, they help their families with, you know, going to around town to do different activities, whether that's going to the store, going to the mechanic, going to government offices, the post office. And so I think like students setting a goal of I want to be able to help my family in this situation, and then focusing on that, I think is a really good way for them to learn English, because it's something that's more concrete. Not just multilingual learners, but all high school students, I feel like, can sometimes suffer from a why am I learning this sort of mentality. They're in maybe a chemistry class and thinking, when will I use this in the future? But I think when it comes to language learning, especially in a context where it's you're in the country where they speak English, it can be very helpful to set a goal of this is a practical situation in which I want to be able to be proficient, and then work towards that.
Okay, so setting we can say a measurable kind of goal and an objective, and contextualizing the kind of materials that they're getting training on, because eventually they're going to leave the classroom and they'll bring that experience with them into real life. So what I understood from your point is that setting a good vision for where you want them to be in, and then contextualizing everything that they're getting in the class. How about grammar? Is it important to explicitly teach?
I think that grammar is important to be explicitly taught, but I think generally language courses often overteach it, because there are I think especially at the lower levels, if you go too deep into grammar, it can be overwhelming.
Of course.
Like for using my son as an example with trying to learn Arabic, my wife was actually studied multiple languages in college, and has an Arabic grammar book that I was looking through, and it was written probably by an old white British imperialist guy, but it's very goes into all the exceptions and things like this, and I was like, this is not what I need. But I think with grammar, you really want to focus on things that will impede communication.
Okay.
That's my philosophy. I know that if your goal is to pass some exam, it's really grammar heavy, obviously different, but for my whose goal is to be able to function well in society, and hopefully be able to, I hope most of my students will choose to go to an American university so that they'll be able to study there. Their focus should be less on never making a mistake, and more making sure that any mistake that they make is not going to impede their ability to communicate. And then once they get to a high enough level, I think focusing more on some of those finer points is important. So I teach two levels. I teach a newcomers, the beginner level, and I teach more intermediate level. And so I focus a lot more on grammar with my intermediate level students, because their ability to communicate basically has already been met, and they focus a lot more on more complex structures. But because my focus is mostly on academic English, a lot of the grammar is focusing on academic writing and discourse, rather than more general life sort of application. So recently I was teaching my students how to make complex and compound sentences, and so that's much more geared towards writing an English paper, which many
of course, because this is what they need and at the academic level. So I can see that there's great marriage between the kind of objective that they have and the kind of materials that they're getting and training on here. And this leads me to another important question. Which one do you think is more challenging to teach, adults or children at the elementary and intermediate level?
Well, I have not taught elementary level. I've only taught at the high school level.
Okay.
But I think definitely high school is more difficult, simply for motivation. Now, if I were in a situation where I was teaching adults who were required to teach it, maybe as a part of their immigration agreement or something like that, maybe it would be different. But in my experience with adults, they all opted into it, and so the motivation was the biggest factor. Now, I think with some adults that I've taught, although the motivation was there, like they had been they had not studied language or school at all for so long that made it a difficult challenge.
That's quite interesting. Now, I'm just wondering, and probably you can share this kind of like feeling with me here when it comes to motivation, since it's an ephemeral kind of expression. I don't see it tangible in some occasions, but why do you, based on your experience, of course, why do you find that some people in high school have higher level of motivation while others don't, even though they are at the same age level? What's the contributing factor to this mystery behind having some high level of motivation and others don't? I grew up in a very rural area where nobody spoke English at all, and I really had high motivation. Up to this minute, I don't know where I got that motivation from. Probably the way my family has just nurtured me in a way that I could be an English teacher, but that even if they did that, it was just deep ingrained subconsciously in my mind. I don't recall any experience where I had direct contact with one of my parents saying to me, "You're going to be a great, brilliant English teacher," or something like that. Not to say that I'm a brilliant English teacher now. I still have a lot of struggle. But the point to be made here is that why do you think some people at high school have higher motivation than others?
So among my students, I like the ones that I see as being highly motivated. Often, they come from families that are very much focused on academics. So they really, in general, emphasize the importance of doing well in school. So there's that factor. I also have some students that get involved with like sports at my school. So like soccer is a big one, where there are people that are born in the United States, but there are also people from the Middle East, people from Spanish-speaking countries that are all on a team together. And so they're forced to speak other languages. And so they're motivated because they want to connect with their friends. Like it's often easy for students in school to just kind of stay in their groups, but when they're on a team together, there's often the requirement for them to be able to talk to them. And so I have one student that he is in his second year of high school. He's a sophomore, and he has an older brother who's a senior and the sophomore. Although he's not incredibly academically geared, I've noticed he is motivated to learn English because he's on the soccer team and wants to be able to connect with his teammates. So I think finding some sort of like
social relevance.
Yeah, some sort of social motivation is a big factor. And then I'm sure that there are sometimes just students feel frustrated whenever they are not able to understand things in their classes, or they're out in their community. They say, I'm not going to keep like hitting my head against the wall. I'm going to learn this so that I can like not feel like this anymore. Those are three big motivators that I've seen among my students.
Okay. And so how do you encourage like the social relevance of the kind of materials that you teach in the classroom? And how do you encourage them to be stubborn and perseverant when it comes to learning, even though that some of them lack social relevance or they don't see any sort of like connection between what they are studying in the classroom and reality outside the doors of the classroom?
So I'm still, as I mentioned, this is only my third year teaching, so I'm still learning exactly how much flexibility I have with the curriculum that my district gives me to add my own things. But like one thing that I've started doing this year with my students is that on a weekly basis, I have them write a dialogue journal with me.
Very useful.
Where they write something that they're interested in. And so like, I think that can increase the relevance, because I say, the only thing I care about is that you write in English, you don't copy it from the internet, and you do your best to use, the grammar that we've been learning in class and just complete it. And that's the only thing I'm going to grade you on. But I want you to write about something that you care about. And so that's one way. I've had varying levels of success with it. Some of them don't seem to fully understand that I don't care what they write about. Many of them are trying to write about like things that they think I care about. I'm like, I don't know anything about soccer, but I want you to tell me, if you like soccer, tell me about soccer. If you like video games, tell me about video games.
Okay. I have a question about you in particular, and the
Sure.
question is as this: since you are an English teacher and an English instructor, and you always try to motivate students to learn English, are you willing to apply the kind of tricks that you have to learn English on learning Arabic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I already, like I said, had my primary motivator to learn Arabic was not
Power is
just
coming back. Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
Want me to
Keep talking.
Okay. So my primary motivator was not because I wanted to like read like great works of literature or whatever. It was very practicable. Like I had students who were not understanding anything that I was saying in class because they just arrived in the country, and I wanted to be able to give them basic instructions. So I think having that clear goal was helpful. But unlike some other languages that I've studied, I didn't have access to people in person that I could immediately turn to. So I've been struggling to find resources that are more helpful, because many of the resources I found were specifically about learning how to read and write. And although that's something I don't mind learning, that's my primary focus was on listening and speaking.
Okay, so great. This is going to be a very important topic to talk about, hopefully in our next meeting. When you have free time, of course, you can just text me. I'm only one message away.
Sure.
Fingers crossed. I want you to send me your Telegram account where I can communicate with you on Telegram. If you have this number on Telegram, I can forward some of the training materials of Arabic, because I've been working teaching Arabic in three embassies, the Australian, the Dutch, and the Sweden embassies in Baghdad for the past few years. And I've collected some materials for training, but most of them were about how to develop good for the advanced level, of course. So I'll send you from my own perspective some shortcuts where you can just go through the puzzle of Arabic and find easier way to learn it.
I love shortcuts.
Thankfully Arabic is if we compare it contrastively to English, there are some good points about Arabic that will expedite the process of your learning of it and speaking it, because Arabic is like Spanish. It's there is the same sound, the sound and the shape of letters are the same. So we don't have like something like CH is pronounced che or SH is pronounced sha. We don't have this kind of craziness of English. So it's one level, not two levels of sound and orthography. The other interesting thing is that we have only we have between 3 to 6 vowels.
Okay.
In English, we have 44. So that's another plus to Arabic. You only have to learn the fatha and dhamma and kasra, which is a, o, e. A, o, e. They're kind of variations for the schwa sound to some extent. So these are the 3 things that we can, from pronunciation point of view, these are the pluses. Sure. But it gets crazier the more you go deeper. But once you are in the surface level of communication, you only need minimal amount of like 100 to like 500 words to be able to compose a sentence and just make yourself clear to the person that you're talking to. I've got some immigrants coming over from other countries, and they spend like 4 or 5 days and they start just saying the basic common Iraqi dialect expressions to people, and they just make themselves very clear, and they just get by quite naturally. So it's not impossible. And once you decide to come over to visit us here in Baghdad, you're more than welcome. I've got a friend from Scotland who has just paid me a visit to my home. I can send you her video. Her name is Emma Wandering. She visited me a few days ago, and she really enjoyed the time with us here. I'm just going to send you the one that we spent together, because there are so many videos that she took in Iraq. She has more than 40 videos on her channel. So this probably is going to give you motivation for that. And yes, I'm sorry I took much of your time, but this is just
this is wonderful. Thank you.
I do train Iraqi students online on this platform of Zoom, and hopefully we can just maintain a few meetings where I can just walk you through some of the basic structure of Arabic, if you're interested, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the ways that I try to learn Arabic so far have been helpful with learning individual words, but I've often found in my language instruction or my language learning, it's often helpful to learn chunks of phrases that can easily be plugged into new verbs or new nouns that I use. And I've had some difficulty finding instructional materials that really focus on.
Of course, I'll be sending you a bunch of them actually, and it's up to you to decide which one is more useful to you and more accessible, because some of them get crazy, especially when you see bulky textbooks that just shock you to this is not the language that I'm going to spend my night. I'm not willing to be a nerd. I just need to make myself clear to people that I'm teaching. So that's good. But remember something, this is probably going to give you some motivation. In California, there is something called DLI, Defense Language Institute, and in this center, it's an American center that teach American officers and soldiers the varieties of Arabic, the Iraqi dialect, the Levantine or Levantine Arabic, and the Moroccan Arabic, Egyptian Arabic. So there are more than one variety of Arabic, plus the modern standard Arabic. So American soldiers are getting training there. And I have seen some of the best 99% native speakers of Arabic learning Arabic in there. So the point is that you can become very fluent in Arabic. I've seen some American soldiers that speak exactly like me. They are almost 100% native speakers of Arabic. So that comes from practice. Every night they go to Starbucks, make small circle, and I sit next to them because they give me motivation, and they start using Quizlet to, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, to practice flashcards. So they sit on the opposite to each other and they say, يذهب, and the other soldier says, goes. يأتي, comes. يقول, says. And they keep doing that. They keep ricocheting that back and forth to the point that they mastered the basic verbs. And, in Arabic, the chassis of Arabic language is verbs, the most common verbs. So focus on that, and you're good to go. Focus on pronouns, how to ask questions, and basic 100 verbs, and you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you for the advice. I appreciate it.
These are the major 3 things that you should start with.
Okay. Well, good.
Great. I'll stay in touch with you, and I have recorded this meeting. I'll send you a link to the recorded meeting of this, so you can have a look at in case you want to share with your friends or with anybody. And if you're interested also, we can just maintain that kind of meetings on a weekly basis whenever you are available, and whenever you are escaping from your children to the other rooms. Because I'm actually escaping from them now.
Well, thank you very much. Shukran.
You're more than welcome.
Masalama?
Ma'a salama, which means with safety or with peace. Literally translation for God be with you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. See you soon.